All right. So I'm normally used to Zarigan slides, and so it's a weird structure, and it's just kind of like an R Markdown document. But so these are the learning objectives that John gave, and we're just going to kind of go through them. They're pretty in line with what chapter 2 covered, and I added some quotes and some of my own examples, but I guess the 4 core design principles of the tidyverse, looking at the design.tidyverse.org website, are just that it's human-centered, designed to promote human usability, consistent, so the packages are all kind of one ecosystem, and learning how to use a function in one is as similar as possible to function in another. They're composable, so you can easily break them down and solve more complex problems with simple steps. And then they're inclusive, both in terms of the R package ecosystem and the community like us that it fosters, #RStats. So that's that. And then looking into the design for humans, there's this quote that was in someone else's book that I used. Programs must be written for people to read and only incidentally for machines to execute. I did attribute it appropriately. So the tidyverse package, the tidyverse suite offers packages that are easily readable and understood by humans, allowing us to more easily achieve our programming goals. So I'm assuming everyone is familiar with the mtcars dataset. If not, stop me. But apparently it has if you do the help thing with the question mark, it tells you all about it. And so that was kind of interesting, actually. It's fuel consumption and different aspects of automobile design from 1973 to 1974. Here's an example of what that looks like. And now, if we wanted to arrange these rows in ascending order based on the mile per gallon and gear variables, how could we do this? And I realize that I can't hide the answer like I normally could. But if you thought or said the arrange function in the dplyr package of tidyverse, you are correct. So thank you. And it takes a data frame using the .data pronoun. I think it's a pronoun, argument, whichever one. So it takes the data frame and you pass directly in the names of the variables that you want to arrange it by. So yeah, that's that. Arrange and other tidyverse functions use names that are descriptive and explicit. They focus on verbs like with pivot longer and pivot wider to transform the data in the tidyr package, or mutate, I think, is a verb also, and so is arrange. So those are just some examples. Any questions so far? If I don't hear anyone, I'm just going to keep going. Oh, someone's chatting. How do I see the chat? That's a good question. I found the chat. I will not hate on using mtcars. I will not hate on. Okay. I use a case for the details block. No dataset snobbery. Details is so helpful for easily hiding. Wow, this is wild. Oh, okay. This is cool. Okay, sorry, I'm done. Next section. So another nice thing about this is, about the tidyverse, is they all typically use the same data structures. So this was a funny quote about a wheel that I found. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, just attach it to a new wagon. So I thought that was kind of funny. There are different types of data in R. There's matrices, lists, data frames. The link, this website is live, by the way. And so if you look at that link, it'll bring you to, I think, Hadley's book that talks more about that. But a typical function would take in data of some form, conduct an operation, and return the result. And the tidyverse functions typically operate on data structures called Tibbles, which are a special type of data frame that have additional properties helpful for data analysis, like list columns, which we'll get into right now, actually. So if you see this object bootsamp, we are using this function bootstraps in the package rsample. That's what the double colon means. So we're using the function bootstraps in our samples to create bootstrap resample, which is just a method of creating, subsets of data from the empty cars object 3 times. And as you can see, this kind of printed out weird actually, but in this splits column, you have a list object, and you have 3 of these. Yeah, here it's written down here. Returns a tibble with a splits column that defines the resampled data sets. So if you index into the splits column, you'll see a list, or you'll see a data frame, I believe, of the specific sample in question. So you can see here that the class of the bootsamp objects is bootstraps, rset, and then tibble underscore df and tibble, and then data frame. So the using Tibbles is just a class that allows some extra functionality, and all the tidyverse functions, or most of the tidyverse functions at least, use consistency, so it returns the same type of object as it is passed in. Any questions with that? Checking the chat. Tony has also had this weird data frame printout thing. Nice, me too, me too. It didn't do that when I made it locally. I just want to point that out. So moving along, design for the pipe. So the pipe, blah, 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 blah. The pipe operator comes from the Magrittr package, and it is used to chain together a sequence of R functions. So the pipe operator uses the value of the object on the left-hand side of the operator as the first argument on the operator's right-hand side. One of my professors, Lucy McGowan, always says, take this, then do this, and the then is the pipe. So the pipe allows for highly readable code. And so going back to empty cars and sorting it by gear, and then taking the first 10 rows. If we wanted to do that, we could do it like this. Traditionally, you just use a function, you save it as an object, you then use that object in another function that you save again. You could also nest those 2 functions like this, or you could use the pipe to substitute the side of the operator with the first argument on the right-hand side, and we get the same result as follows. So these 2 objects are equivalent. Now, this approach works because all the functions return the same data structure, which is what I mentioned earlier, how most of the tidyverse functions just append a new class if there's something special about that object. So that's really powerful, and I wanted to try to make a nice block, but I didn't have time to do that. So whenever possible, create functions that can be incorporated into a pipeline of operations. So questions with the pipe? Comments, concerns? Somebody not like my haircut? I don't blame you. My mom doesn't like it. Anyways, design for functional programming. Thank you. I see a smile on Tan. Yes, okay. I think that was a smile. Otherwise, that's awkward. Anyways, design for functional programming. Functional programming is an approach to replace iterative, i.e. for loops. So if you want to take 2 times the square root of MPG for each car in the data frame, you could do this with a nice loop. You could also, Jonathan brought the jokes tonight. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad someone thinks I'm funny. Oh, thinking of pipe as and then. Oh, thank you, John. Yes, I agree. Okay, so you could do this for a loop, which I do have a question for you guys. When I was looking at this in Hadley's book also, it's not that for loops are necessarily slower, it's just that typically what happens in the body is slower, like rewriting and copying an existing object. So in this specific example, which we're going to go through, I'd value your guys' thoughts on whether or not the for loop is much slower or any slower. I haven't done that micro benchmark myself, but I just like your guys' thoughts. But we're basically taking this for loop and we are creating a function called my square root, which takes in some MPG value and then some weight, and it just returns the square root just like this using the weight times the square root. Functions that are good for functional programming are ones that don't have any side effects, so they don't like save something to the global environment or have a print statement, though print statements are somewhat okay if you want to see that visual thing. But using the per package for small, oh wow, for small loops, the for loop is probably faster. Interesting. So we can use the per package, which has a link here, per.tidyverse.org if you want, to forego the for loop, pun intended, and use the map family of functions. So these map functions are based off the mathematical mapping of some input to some output given some function. And so you're mapping with this function and you'll return an output. So in this code box right here, we are applying my square root function with a weight of 2, as you can see here, to the first 3 elements as indicated by head, empty cars, mpg3. User supplied functions, it's important with the per package to preface them with this twiddle. I believe this is an anonymous function, unless the anonymous function is the other one, which has the function. If someone knows, I'm sure someone else knows more than that than me. Yeah, oops. Oh, wait. OPE till, that's called a twiddle? I thought, oh, Hadley's book has a twiddle. That's all I know. Benchmark is another option by Jim Hester.
Twiddle is like, I looked this up once because Hadley says twiddle. Like okay. It's tilde to everyone except statisticians, as far as I could find.
Okay. Well, that's what I get for looking at Hadley's book.
Yeah.
So, and do you know, John, if this was an anonymous function or if the anonymous function is the one with the function x and then?
It is a lambda function, which is a short way to write an anonymous function.
Okay. So this lambda function, you can use the tilde or twiddle if you're Hadley or statisticians, and you can pass in this .x argument. I believe it's .x only because a lot of functions take in x as an argument, so they wanted to specify that this was something different. So passing in the first 3 MPG values from empty cars to our square root statement, we get this output. And by default, the map function returns a list. But if you know the class of a function's output, you could use special suffixes such as map CHR for character, DBL for double, or LGL for logical. You could also do map functions with 2 inputs. So you could specify that with map2, which requires .x and .y arguments. And that would look like this, where we're supplying for the first MPG element, just multiply that square root by 1. Second MPG element, multiply that square root argument by 2. Third one by 3. And we get this output here. Any questions with per or mapping or why it's tilde or twiddle? Okay, so we will move along to Tibbles versus data frames. So a Tibble is a special type of data frame with some additional properties. Specifically, Tibbles work with column names that are not syntactically valid variable names. So if you try doing this data frame, this does not work, equals 1, 2, and oops, equals 3, 4. Then it doesn't actually keep the spaces and will replace them with periods. You can, as the tidy modeling with our book pointed out, have check names equals false, but that seems you could just use a Tibble also. So this does work though, right off the bat, woohoo, and there you go. Although it's now printing in a weird way, so that's kind of funky. So Tibbles also prevent partial matching of arguments to avoid accidental errors. So if we have data frame where a column partial is 1 through 5, and then a Tibble where the column partial is 1 through 5, if we try to index into partial but forget the IAL for some reason, If you do it with the data frame, it will return that those values. If you do it with a Tibble, though, it'll tell you you're wrong and you need to remember what the last 3 letters of partial are. So that's that. Questions so far? I see some things in the map, but Tyler Grant Smith is a moderator and he's on the case, so I feel confident. Thank you, Tyler. Also, Tan and Tyler, I think you both helped me previously, so thank you for that also. So a next feature of Tibbles, they prevent dimension dropping. So subsetting data into a single column will never return a vector. If you subset into the partial column of df, you'll get that. You will get the same Tibble column partial back, even if it is printed funky. There's one of those is correct. I think it's funky. Anyways, Tibbles allow for list columns, which is the last feature we have here, which can be a powerful tool with working when working with the per package. So if you have a template list that is 5 elements and you are creating a data frame and you add a list call with the template list, it will actually expand that. So make the data wide and say just take the value in each list element and create a new column out of it entirely. But if you do a Tibble out of that, then you will just get a returned list that will actually be like this. So you will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It'll basically be a repeat of call in this specific instance. I don't know why it's printing funky, sorry. But this is really powerful. If you go back to the per package and functional programming, you can mutate, so you can add a column to your data frame by doing our my square root function, for example, on each of those elements in the list. And that will come in handy later on with modeling, I'm sure. So our last topic for the evening, I know, I'm sorry, is how to read and wrangle data. So the following example was just copy and pasted with a slight modification from the Heidi modeling book. And it just shows how to read in the data with the readr package and easily manipulate it using the dplyr and lubridate packages. So I thought maybe we would do like a live walk through each step just to kind of see what each step does, because I know that's been helpful for me in the past, just seeing how each thing goes together. So yeah, I'm gonna move a window somewhere if you can see that. All right, so we have the data already loaded, I believe. Great, because it's about 1 million rows, so that takes a while to download. But if we are going to first read the data, check, and then does everyone know what the select function does? Boo, insert environment pane comment. The correct window set. Thank you, Joe. I agree. So for anyone who does not know what the select data or select function does, is it selects specific columns. Sorry, I'm gonna move this over here so I can look at what I'm supposed to do next. So we have the raw data and we are going to select the station column. So right now it's station name, as you can see by just tabbing it, but we're gonna rename it as station like they did. So we're just going to do station equals station name. And then we're also going to select date and rides. So our raw data, if you look over in the console on the right-hand side, it has these columns: station ID, station name, date, day type, and rides. We are only caring about these guys. So station, date, and rides, where we have renamed station name. We are now going to mutate. So again, the select and the mutate function are both in the dplyr package. Mutate is a really powerful tool allowing you to add a new column and replace existing things in existing columns. But for this purposes, we are going to replace existing things. So we're going to mutate the date column, and we are going to turn these character values. You can tell that they're character values because it says CHR here. We are going to turn these character values into lubridate, month, day, year. So this deals with dates and POSIX something stuff that I have no knowledge about. But we are just going to do this lubridate, month, day, year, date, because that's the structure of our date function. And so if we do that, we'll see that, date, so, but you can see that this is now date type. So let's go back and correctly spell date. And then we're also going to do, we're going to turn this rides value into just divide it by 1,000 and get it in thousands. So rides is just equal to rides divided by 1,000. And that's what we have now. So that's a nicer, easier number. Any questions with that so far? Am I going too slow, too fast? Should I stop talking already? I get a thumbs up from Tan.
You're great, but can you make your font bigger?
I can absolutely do that. Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay, sorry. We don't pull punches with dark mode. Do you not like dark mode, Tan?
I think we're all in favor of dark mode.
We're all in favor of dark mode. We're arguing about pane layout, but dark mode's great. Yeah.
Okay, I also have light mode. So all right, so we've done the date and yes, RS themes. We've done the date and the rides, and now we're going to summarize the multiple records. So we're going to use group by function, which will allow us to basically create groups out of every combination of, in this case, date and station. So date and station. And now if we run this, we'll see that there is slowness. All right, so we have groups up here. That's how we can tell this is a grouped data frame. Here where it was not grouped, it is not there, so that's helpful. But every combination of station and date is now in one group, so any operation we perform on it will be specific to those individual groups. Does that make sense? Does anyone have questions with that? Okay, I'm going to summarize what I said, but I'm chish. All right, so we have rides. So we're going to summarize our rides column and set that equal to the maximum number of rides. So we're going to get an error here, or a message at least, saying that we want it, that the groups were dropped, and are we going to want to drop them? It can be overridden, blah, 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 which we will do next. But right now, these are the maximum amounts of rides that happened in each date and each station. And so that was exciting. And yeah, this is actually all that they did in their thing. I don't know if you guys want to visualize anything or whatnot. We could do ggplot. They didn't cover that. I'm happy to answer questions or stop talking and let us go home, or I'm assuming we are home or somewhere, but yeah.
I thought that was pretty good. I think that was a good example of like why everyone loves the tidyverse. It's like these are very common actions, and it's like so natural at this point to most our users. But yeah, no, I think that's a good example.
So I have a question. So the groups now, it does not have rides. I'm sorry, it doesn't have station there anymore. So is this the summarize, which drops the last group by, or is it still group by date and station, but it just doesn't show it to you there?
That's a good question. So my understanding is that it drops the last group. And so right now, as you mentioned, it's just grouped by date. In their book, they have dot groups equals drop, which will basically drop any groupings left at the end. So once this is done running, you'll see that there's no groups involved. If you didn't want to use the dot groups equals drop, you could also just use the ungroup function, which would lead to the same thing. But yeah, good question.
Thanks.
Anything else? Because that's all I've got.
Hey, this is Arjun. Earlier when we talked about the per package, thought you said the my square root was an anonymous function, but I thought we had defined that before, right? So it's not an anonymous function.
Somebody else can answer that better than me, I'm sure. An anonymous function is just one that's in line with something. I think it was actually a lambda function, and I misspoke. But if you're using the MT cars MPG, if you're doing something like this where you take function and then MPG and then you just say square root of MPG, right? So you're passing into this function the value from here and just returning the square root. So this should return a list, right? And so this is an anonymous function because it's in line. You're defining it here. I guess you're technically right that since we defined the my root function earlier, it wasn't. Or you could use this as a shorthand notation also. So if we define this somewhere else and then just use the tilde, then you're right, it's not necessarily an inline function. So that's a good point.
Okay, I just wanted that. Okay, thanks.
Yep. I don't know if John is still here, but now I feel like the leader is lost. So I've got nothing else. Happy to stay in chat or not.
Jonathan, I think there was an interesting discussion in the chat about some of the different ways of using map.
Okay.
Maybe that's something that could sort of like using lambda functions versus not. And I think maybe some of the people who are knowledgeable that might want to share sort of the pros and cons of both approaches.
Yeah, I'm not the most knowledgeable. I use the lambda functions personally, just because it looks nicer than doing the function ones, but I don't know what's going on under the hood necessarily, so I'm gonna let other people talk about that.
Lambda is the .x .y, right? Is that what that?
Yeah, with the tilde. That's...
Okay.
I think it's a more of a comfort level. The writing explicitly the function with the argument, and then that's a step before the lambda function. And if you feel comfortable that you understand the tilde with the .x on it and the .y, knowing that there are a certain number of arguments that you want in there, then you can use it. But functionally, there's no difference between writing function x comma y with curly brackets. It's the same exact thing. It's not going to change how per deals with it under the hood.
It's less typing though.
But I mean, it's also readability. So people who aren't used to it, they'll be confused by it if you're handing your code off to someone else that isn't used to it. So it's a style. And
especially if the function is getting very complex, then it really makes sense to pull that out and define that separately so you can reason about it. I mean, especially with a dplyr pipeline where you're having multiple steps go through that, there having composability for functions is really a nice feature to have. As always, it depends.
Yeah, a lot of times I'll use lambda notation just when I'm quickly working, and then I'll come back, and if it's, like if I'm using it in a package, which most of what I do use in a package, I'll pull it out and formalize it and make it clean and pretty so other people can read it. But if I'm just working on it you know, if I'm not going to touch the code again, I'll leave it as the tilde, but it is harder to read until you know how to read it, and then not necessarily that much harder to read.
Yeah, there's also the problem of future you in a month.
Yep.
That you won't know what you actually wanted to do at that point. So.
I'm surprised that it's slower. That's weird to me.
Slower?
I just dropped the link to the chat. No, the name of the function. I just ran benchmark on the 3 different options, and I guess it's not looking for the definition of the function or something. Is that what? Does that explain what I'm looking at?
I don't know.
It's weird, right? Like it repeated, I don't know, like for like 30 or however many standard iterations there were. But
So
that is a
question
fair
of map versus v-apply. That the equivalent of map, I think, would be the big M AP compared to the per map. That's the equivalent that you would want to look at. V-apply is a bit different.
Well, the thing that I like about map and all the map family is the like order of arguments is very standardized. Like you don't have to remember, oh wait, in this one you need to put that argument first and the other argument second and whatever. And it's just that's the whole tidyverse thing, that they try to make it that once you learn one, you've learned them all. It's the same idea all throughout. So to answer the difference with v-apply.
And the map can return, for the answer there, the map can return not only a list. If you do map underscore with the output that you want, you can have it return characters, doubles, logicals, stuff like that. So it's not constrained only to a list.
But I think the important thing is it always will return a list if you use just the default map. So no matter what you stick at it. Whereas some of the R functions, like the base functions, will actually return different types. Like they'll simplify the type for you. So like, let's say if it's like a list of 1, it might return just a character. So that can be like, that's just one of the differences, that it's consistent in what it returns.
Correct, and the backend of per map is a bit different than what v-apply or the applies are running in the backend also. So there's a difference what's going on in the back.
Tan, I was just going to say with that example you shared with performance benchmarks, I think it might be because square root, with the first one, it has to look for what square root means in the namespace. And the next 2, it just has the function right there in terms of performance differences.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I just someone suggested base our like big M map, and that's even faster again, just if you are curious. But you know, it's all really negligible. Like looking up the definition isn't the expensive part usually of whatever function you're doing. So it's probably not worth remembering or changing your patterns to squeeze out whatever amount of time you get to do it.
And if you want to really dive into the rabbit hole, Bob Rudis wrote a package that mimics all of the most of the per functions with base functions. So you can compare and contrast using that package.
Is that bplyr?
No, that's mine.
Okay, I know it's you and Bob have that base R-verse or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I forgot what his is called, but it's he mimicked everything in per.
Cool. So John left. I think. Yeah, he made me the host, so I'm assuming he's gone. We have a presenter for next week. Any other discussion points before we sign off here?
Hey, when you group by and summarize, it drops one grouping variable, right? Is there an option to force it to not drop it?
In the latest dplyr, you can specify .groups equals, I think it's keep.
Okay.
Yeah.
It will not drop.
Okay.
Which
That has given me some trouble a couple of times, so thanks.
Yeah, no worries. And that's only really for summarize. So mutate will by default not drop because it keeps the same number of rows, right? So
Yeah.
it's only the summarize that would drop the thing.
Okay.
Okay, so next week's going to be R modeling fundamentals. And Tony's already volunteered to do that. So we'll catch y'all in the Slack channel and possibly next week. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.